Hey guys, this is EckhartsLadder. Hello and welcome to another Star Wars video. Before we begin, I am once again asking for your support. Over on my second channel tonight, we will be streaming some Beerio Kart, which is basically drunk Minecraft, and we've set it so if we get to 400 viewers, Charlie, my co-host, will shave his head. He thinks it's unlikely, but I'm hoping you guys will help me out and we can get there, and you can see him shave his head on stream. It'll be funny. Links to that in the description. If you come on by, we'll be starting at around 9 o'clock Eastern time, and I'll owe you one. Anyway, on to today's video. I want to talk about the Battle of Exegol, and I've been wanting to do one final video on this topic for a while, just so I can get out sort of all the negative feelings I have about it, and now that the movie's out on DVD and Blu-ray, I think now is a good time. And I just want to be clear, I don't have too many problems with what happened on the ground. Palpatine facing off with Rey and Kylo was kind of cool. I don't like exactly how it played out, but that's not the topic of today's video. Instead, I want to cover the space battle itself. And there's really so much here that doesn't make sense, starting from the basic premise. So apparently Palpatine has constructed a fleet of Imperial Star Destroyers, which, by the way, look exactly like the Imperial 1 class Star Destroyer from Rogue One and A New Hope, but they're all actually new ships, and for some reason they're scaled up. Now, this could have been a point where we could have explained how the Empire lost so many Star Destroyers immediately after Endor, but instead, for some reason, Palpatine didn't want to make a new ship design or improve on the ISD, he just made it larger and put a gun on it. And he made everything larger as well. Not just the ship itself, but the shield bulbs, the cannons, even the windows. So pretty strange setup he's got going there. Every ship is a super weapon, of course. There's no fleet variety, there's no escort vessels, we just have Palpatine and a whole lot of firepower. That alone is fine, although really lazy. It's very clear that the Zeist was created because there was an existing Star Destroyer model in very high quality from Rogue One and Solo, and they didn't want to make another one, despite there actually being designs found in the Episode 9 art book, which were leaked. By the way, if you're wondering how many Star Destroyers were there, well, the novelization clears that up. Not 1,000, not even 5,000. Here's the quote. More ships rose, and more, until tens of thousands hovered in the atmosphere. For a generation my disciples have labored, Emperor Palpatine said, his voice dark and deep. Kylo's heart was racing, so much power, a starfield of destroyers, the largest fleet the galaxy had ever known. So somehow, because Palpatine has a few dedicated lads under his control, he manages to pump out the largest fleet ever seen in history, each of which has a super laser attached to it. Yeah, that's a lot of power, and it's a little ridiculous. The annoying thing is, it just didn't have to be this way. Palpatine's fleet could have been small. It could have been a flagship and some new Star Destroyers. It could have been enough to turn the tide of the war and to completely subjugate the galaxy, but without being completely over the top and ridiculous. And there are aspects of the Zeist fleet that I like. I like that it was made in secret on what's essentially a Sith fortress world. I like that all of the crew running it are basically brainwashed children, and I really like all of the uniforms of the Sith Eternal. But the fleet being so large really sets off issues that just can't be fixed, and the story is written around the absurdity, which really ties into the battle making no sense. So with this massive force, you need a way to beat it, and that gives us three really annoying points of this battle. The first is the idea of no shields in atmosphere, the second is the whole idea of it being impossible to leave Exegol, and the third is the ludicrous size of the Resistance fleet, which literally comes out of nowhere. Let's talk about that point first. The Resistance fleet. Before the rise of Skywalker, we got both a comic series and a book, and I'm referring to Star Wars Resistance Reborn and Star Wars Allegiance, which were supposed to show us how the Resistance was gaining forces back after their main fleet's destruction in Episode 8. The problem is that both of those stories really go to show us how hard of a time the Resistance is having securing allies. It takes them 4 comic issues and a bunch of stolen fan art to get the Mon Calamari Calamari to join their side. And in Resistance Reborn, they don't really accomplish that much despite scouring much of the galaxy. So in the years since episode 8, the Resistance has managed to secure maybe 24 starfighters, a few capital ships, and has to take down this massive fleet. Well, that brings us the problem of what some people are calling the Galaxy Fleet, the one that Lando brings. And I really loved Billy D. Williams in this movie. I do like the shot where he comes and saves everybody, but the problem is this fleet is ludicrously large. He had 16 hours to find reinforcements for the Resistance. And listen, I know Lando's a charmer, but especially when you factor in hyperspace travel time and everything else, he's not that good. I was hoping the novelization would help explain what happens, but really all we get is that he and Chewbacca visited a few key worlds like Mon Calamari, but that aside from that, he would just essentially be dropping off beacons, leading people to the final battle. Now, that kind of doesn't make sense because they all arrive at the same time, but that's only the tip of the iceberg. Yes, the First Order had been blocking some communication in the galaxy, but the size of the New Republic, Resistance, or whatever fleet here is just absolutely ginormous. And not only is it large, but if you look at the fleet composition, there are perhaps 1,000 Mon Calamari cruisers. I'm talking about everything from MC-85 variants to some capital ships which look even more powerful than what we've seen on screen up to this point. Very large, powerful looking Mon Calamari cruisers. Where were those sitting? How did none of those fight back against the First Order? I mean, at one point in the novelization, General Pride says that this fleet will increase their strength 10,000-fold. Well, if that's true, then the forces in the galaxy would have vastly outpowered the First Order already. And I know there's something to be said about First Order communications jamming and fear keeping people from operating together, but there's so much power here. And the fleet composition doesn't make sense for other reasons. It's very clear that ILM just took whatever resources they had and used them willy-nilly. Not only that, apparently some of the ships were basically designed by an algorithm. It would take existing models and sort of kit bash them. But when we see the fleet, we see 3 versions of the Ghost, for example. We see, according to the Star Wars wiki, 25 at least of Han's freighters from episode 7, as well as a buttload of ships that have appeared at one time or the other. Now, obviously the Ghost is part of a larger freighter line, as was Han's ship, but it would have been much more unique to have just one of those vessels flying around than literally 25 plus of them. There's nothing really ILM could have done though. They were put into a terrible position. They had to make a fleet large enough to conventionally destroy this fleet of Star Destroyers. So of course they had to reuse assets. But it all ties back to that initial mistake, and it ends up making the final space battle really boring and, in my opinion, kind of lazy. But let's also talk about shields, because even with this massive fleet, they still couldn't take down the Star Destroyers if it wasn't for them not having shields. It makes sense that the main gun on the Zeistin was a weak spot, but why couldn't they put their shields up in atmosphere? I get the lack of control otherwise, because I guess they were sort of being coordinated by a central signal, but if anything, shields in atmosphere would help protect against Exegol's elements. It's just another needless explanation that only exists because the Resistance needs some way to win that doesn't logically break the universe, which, as we're discussing here, is just not possible. Finally, we have the issue of navigation, and this is really the smallest complaint I have. The idea is the Sith Star Destroyers were not quite finished yet at the beginning of the movie, so that's why they didn't leave earlier, I guess, but it still doesn't make sense why Palpatine wouldn't send out some sort of advanced force. I mean, even for Palpatinian standards, this is putting all of your eggs in one basket. We know that the one Star Destroyer which blew up Kijimi was designed exactly for that purpose, but for some reason returned to Exegol and was destroyed alongside the rest of the fleet. That, I will admit, is an unfortunate timeline for the captain of that vessel. But why would Palpatine announce his plans for violent galactic domination before, having his Star Destroyers ready? Palpatine does make some tactical errors, one would be the Battle of Endor, but it's always because he's got a greater plan. I guess you could say that his plan here was to show Rey the destruction he could cause during the space battle as he did with Luke, but overall I just don't like the way that this works out. Finally, the last thing I have to complain about is that General Pride says fire all ion cannons and the ships just fire all their ordinary guns, but that's just a me thing, I guess. Most people in the theater probably didn't care about that. But ion cannons would be the very last thing you'd want to target starfighters with. They are not very accurate, they're pretty slow moving. You'd want to use your ship's laser cannons, which are meant in an anti-starfighter role. Ion cannons are for shields and disabling things. Come on. Anyway guys, now that I've got all this negativity out of my system, I think I can stop talking poorly about the Battle of Exegol. I've really given it a walloping on this channel. Maybe I'll do a further breakdown of the Resistance fleet, especially some of those new large Mon Calamari cruisers, because I find those interesting. But just a reminder, we will be streaming Burial Cart tonight. Please help me get to 400 viewers. I really want to see Charlie drunkenly shave his head. Until then though guys, have a great one. May the Force be with you.